Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Dianne Hartshorn.
We are super excited about today's episode because we have often talked about the importance of preservation. We've mentioned some preservation techniques in various episodes, but we've never done an episode yet that focuses solely on cemetery preservation. So I am super excited to finally be doing that episode. But Dianne and I were waiting until we had somebody who really knows their stuff to join us to talk about all of this, because it's important that, or at least to me and to Dianne, it's important that this gets done right. And if you're somebody who's new to preservation, we want you to get the proper information so that when you start doing it yourself, you're not going out and just randomly doing weird stuff that could, damage a headstone, or a cemetery would get angry at you for doing, or even a descendant who might go to the grave later and be like, what is going on here? So we are so excited to have a guest today who has been doing this for quite a while. And I'm going to let Dianne introduce her because she and Dianne have known each other for a while. So Dianne.
Well, we've known each other via Facebook and Instagram. And
that's a familiar story.
Yeah, Rachel she's owns Epoch Preservation in Ipswich, Massachusetts. And what is so cool, two things that's very, very cool. She gets to work in some of the oldest burial grounds in the country with some of the oldest stones. And what I don't know, I find it very interesting. She's also, one of us cemetery chicks who are out there actually working in the cemetery, because it's predominantly a male field. So with that, I was so excited that she agreed to be on the podcast.
And during Women's History Month, just pointing that out.
Yes, exactly. Very into Women's History Month. So with that, I turn it over to Rachel.
Rachel Meyer.
Rachel Meyer. Thank you, Jennie.
Thank you. That is quite the introduction. It's so funny because just in your introduction, I was like, I have so much to say about all of that. And yeah, so Dianne and I have known each other on Instagram for a while, but don't delegitimize our friendship, because that's how everybody is meeting these days. And those are the interactions we've had during the pandemic, and they don't mean any less to me than my in-person relationships do, because that's what we have. That's how we get by, right? So yeah, I count you amongst my friends. And so, I'm here in Massachusetts. I'm sitting in a first period house that was built in 1715. So it's creaky. There's a lot of road noise. I have exactly this corner to sit in because it's so small. But that's where I am. And I've been doing this for 10 years. So I am, along with my partner, Joshua Gerloff, a co-founder, which is what we call ourselves, of Epoch Preservation. We're incorporated, so there's no defined owner. We're, co-founders. And we've been doing this for a decade after we found an abandoned cemetery and dedicated ourselves to saving it. And then it just didn't stop from there. So...
Well, and like Dianne said, being in Massachusetts, you're near a lot of the really old ones in America. You have some of the oldest ones right there with you. So you get to see really how these stones age and bear under time. I mean, I was just talking to my mom this morning. So in case, Salem, Massachusetts is my favorite place in the whole world. And they will be celebrating their 400th birthday in 2026. So we were just talking about that this morning. So their burial grounds are that old. Just so that puts it in perspective, which I guess is not as old as some of the European cemeteries, but for us, that's old. So you get to work among those headstones.
Yeah, but I've been told that our gravestones are about as old as the ones in the European cemeteries because they just haven't lasted as long.
That's true.
So even though, sure, they were established far before ours, there are a lot of gravestones around here that rival in age those cemeteries just because of their longevity. So I am from this area. I have, all my roots are from here. I'm a witch trial descendant. I worked for the Salem Cemetery Department for 2 years in their historic cemeteries. And, all of the old cemeteries around here. In fact, the oldest gravestone in Massachusetts dates to 1647, and it is diagonal from where I live at Old North Burying Ground in Ipswich. So we're kind of lucky in that a lot of our earlier gravestones have stood the test of time just because of the material that was used. It isn't like Connecticut where they used a lot of sandstone, which kind of like explodes from within. We don't have a lot of sandstone in this area. It's primarily schist, slate, fieldstone, marble, limestone, and similar in granite, of course, but not a lot of the sandstone that just doesn't last. So we kind of lucked out in that way.
Yeah, sandstone, unfortunately, just like you said, it either explodes or it seems like it crumbles. We have a lot of sandstone ones here that are they just crumble over time and they become like these weird little stumps. And it's sad too, because you're just like, oh, some of them you can tell at one point were very intricate and had really neat carvings, but because it's such a soft stone, it just kind of
flakes off. Falls.
Yeah.
You have to treat those sandstone. You have, I think you have sandstone behind you, Diane.
Oh, yeah.
I think you have the sand, or is that schist? I can't tell.
That one might be.
Yeah.
That carver used a little bit of both schist and sandstone in that cemetery. It looks a little red in the picture, so either way.
That's what I'm like. It's got some red in it.
This is off of your website, so it shows the before.
You think I would know then, but I don't remember. We repair so many gravestones every year, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So it's but it looks a little sandstone-y from here.
It kind of does.
But schist and sandstone kind of act in the same way because they are porous. But schist, for whatever reason, maybe because it's just a variant of shale, so it's sort of metamorphized a little bit differently, doesn't tend to blow up from the inside. Where sandstone, because it's so porous, it's like the water gets into the stone and erodes in the middle. And then it's just like, ta-da! By the time it decides to do that, it's almost too far gone. Like a lot of the examples of it that you see in Connecticut are just, there's just a hole in all the stone, and the best you could possibly do is maybe collect the pieces and try to put them back in. But the best you can really do is just infill it with a color matched mortar if you don't have those pieces. So, we are lucky in that way where even with schist, it does get what we call facial delaminations, which is flaking on the face of it, and it wants to sort of shear off and delaminate like slate does. But you can usually still find the pieces and put them back. They don't completely disintegrate, except for in like really rare occasions.
So, like you said, you decided to save this forgotten cemetery, but why? I mean, what was your push behind it? Because we could all do so many other things that would probably I won't say not be rewarding, but people don't really understand the financial costs that to start doing this and how much is involved. And he's like, oh, you're just out there doing it out of the goodness of your heart, which you are, but there is so much more involved than just saying I'm going to go out and I'm going to
clean a cemetery.
Headstone. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, there is. And it's often when I got started, I felt like I was always being asked, what's a beautiful girl like you doing in a place like this?
All beautiful girls hang out in cemeteries, don't we?
To save history. I was a museum manager, and I worked in museums, historic museums and art museums for, 15 years, like a really long time. And I remember just feeling like I'm in this museum and I want to be somebody who's either making history or discovering history. I don't want to simply curate it or talk about other people who got their hands dirty. I'm very hyper. Like I was a bit of a nightmare museum employee because I just couldn't stop moving. Like even like I would wait for guests, but I'd have to knit. Well, like I couldn't stop moving. And so I was writing this NaNoWriMo style novel that you write in a month. And I was like petering out at the end, but I was so close to finishing. And I was like, I'm going to go Google historic burying ground, Gloucester, because that's where it's set and it'll inspire me. And I went out there and I couldn't even walk in without wading through weeds that were up to my shoulders. I
Wow.
didn't even know weeds grew that tall, but I have ridiculous photos of even Josh, who's 6'4", like swimming through weeds. And so I
Yikes.
got home and I was like, Josh, man, I can't let this go. This is too much. We didn't have a weed whacker. We were too poor. We're just broke museum arty weirdos, just with our bare hands and borrowed tools. So we had a scythe. Josh looked so funny out there being as tall as he is with a scythe, just whacking away weeds because we couldn't afford a weed whacker. And I think if we could just make these paths so people could just get to the gravestones, these are many of the people that I was talking about in the museums,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, and I felt like, oh, there are so many people who are going to save these houses. They're so, it's, of course, houses also need advocacy, but there are a lot of people studying museum studies and almost no one studying gravestone studies, right? So
Yep.
I was like, if I walk away, I live in Massachusetts. There's like 20 Harvard educated girls just waiting to take my job. Like, I'm not special here. So I'm going to dedicate my life to saving these places that no one seems to see anymore. And it felt like a bit of an emergency. For some reason, our burying grounds were in particularly bad condition in this area, surprisingly, given how much we care about history. And that's what I did. I fought with a town that had no cemetery department whatsoever. And I had to turn them into friends after telling them, you're not mowing, you're not doing this. And we removed, poison ivy vines from trees. We were nice enough to have somebody hire goats for us for a couple of years, like
Oh,
different
nice.
times we had goats. They had to be saved in the middle of the night during a nor'easter.
Oh,
Like
no.
it was kooky. Like Josh always had poison ivy. He was just a rash for like 2
Oh.
years.
Just a rash.
That's basically it. Just a guy walking around.
Lifelong poison. It's just poison ivy, I swear.
Oh my goodness.
Poor
And
guy.
There was 2 years of this. And like 2 years later, I was like, okay, we now have an established cemetery department in Gloucester where we don't even live. I'm going to hand it over to them and they can run with it. And, I need to at some point go back to work. I'm very dedicated to being a starving artist. But at some point it was like, I'm starving a little too much. I have to go back to work. And so I handed it over exactly at the 2-year mark and was like, I'll never do that again because it was stressful. And I was like, as a woman and as just a really outspoken person who just says, I'm not mean, but I say, I'm honest and I say what I think. I made some friends who admired that and I made enemies who wanted me to just shut up. So after 2 years of like just critical stuff, but also like lots and lots of love, it just was an emotional roller coaster that I felt like I needed to get off of for a little while. And so I did for maybe a month. Like, oh man, I have all these classes I took in conservation and no one else has this training besides us, or very few people do, or at least people who aren't charging so much that it's unattainable.
Right.
And no one in our area. People need to like travel in to repair gravestones. And so there was a site in Newbury that was struggling. And I was like, hey, can we help you somehow? And they already had a grant and they're like, in order to accept this grant, you need to become a business. And we were like, oh man, okay, we'll become a business. And so we went through all the names we could find. And the one that was left was Epic. Josh came up with our name and we fought about the pronunciation. And we called our English professor friend who takes care of Rumney Marsh Burying Ground in Revere, who didn't at the time. He was just just a strange person we met at a graveyard. And we were like, how do you say this word? He's like, well, you're American, so you can say epic. If you're British, you would say epoch. And we kind of went from there and just formed a business out of necessity. And then turns out our services were needed. And it turned out that there were funds available to, to pay us to do it. So
even better.
I never went back to work. I just kept going. So yeah, so now we use municipal funds and Community Preservation Act funds and run around and repair gravestones. And we went from begging people to let us repair gravestones only like 10 years ago to having 1,500 gravestone contracts, and
Oh my gosh,
in a
that's
really short
fantastic.
time. Well, people were waiting for us.
Right. They were ready for somebody who could come and do it to come and do it.
A local. Yeah, they wanted
Yes.
a local.
And I think that's even better because I think as a local, some of that means a little more to you. Like you yourself, you spent all that time in the museum
Right.
studying the people in the area, and now you had a chance to help preserve their headstones and make sure their burial site was in good shape. So for you, that probably means a little bit more than it would to somebody who, say, came from California out to Massachusetts to help restore those particular graves.
Yeah, and I drive by them every day.
Right.
And, I'm related to a lot of the people buried in them, although I don't tend to talk about that very much just because it doesn't interest me as much. Like my own genealogy isn't as interesting to me as the actual art and all of that. So, yeah.
But that's great.
Yeah, because I know you had mentioned before where you sort of struggled at first with people allowing you and trusting you to actually be able to do the work. So I think to the point now that you said you have over 1,500 contracts, I think is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Like we have a job down in the Concord, Lexington area next year for the next 2 years for 1,500 stones. But we also have probably like 10 other sites we're working on in Essex County on top of that. But they're like smaller jobs. They're just so like, when this contract is over, we have our regular clients to come back to afterwards.
But that's exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, but it is overwhelming. We're like, how do we find a place to stay when we're down there? How do we, there's a lot of hidden expenses to any business, but especially one where you're doing hard manual labor throughout the day. Like you want to go back to a place that's comfortable and
where you can take a shower.
Take a shower. Yeah, sit in a hot tub. If a puddle would do, I'll sit in a puddle.
And it's just the two of you. So
I'm usually very, very, very sore at the end of the day. And, yeah.
It's a lot of work.
You did not start off making this a business. So many people, I think, look at this and think it's, oh my goodness, I'm going to make $1 million, fixing headstones, repairing headstones, and then it just doesn't work that way. And I don't think they realize the time and what it does wear you out. It does make you sore, and just the investment and training that you have to have. And that's what's so scary when we see things on YouTube, because anybody could post anything. And some of the techniques that Jennie shared one with me several weeks ago that I think we went to bed and had nightmares. It was just so horrific. But unfortunately, this person has lots of followers, so they're going to think that this is the way to do it. And it's going to encourage other people who may not take the time to actually find out the correct information, because she just makes it look so easy. And then in the meantime, they are destroying, they're destroying history. And we, like the stone behind me is definitely one of yours. And I can't even imagine if somebody went and just, ignorantly destroying that headstone, it's gone forever. And it's
I'm trying to read whose stone it is. Here lies buried the body of, oh, it's like a vision test. I think it might be one of the, so the reason, one of these stones in this site is actually, the son is a carver, one of the Mullicans. And I can't tell if this is a Mullican gravestone that we're looking at, but yeah, no, they're precious and they all have stories around here. And I think there are pros and there are cons to social media. I don't think that we could have gotten off the ground without social media, because when you have an army of people behind you, people listen, you know, but we certainly don't have 2 million followers. We have, I don't know, like 7,000 followers on Instagram, but they're the right followers for us. They're museum people and history people. And we don't have that wide appeal because we're doing things in a way that maybe isn't so stimulating.
But that's kind of what I mean. For the ones that are doing the like real quick cleaning, going in and making it shiny all of a sudden, I think I think some people, and I've seen it in other like Facebook groups and stuff where people are just wanting to start out. I don't think they realize that it takes a lot of time for the stones to age and become the way they become. I mean, these are old stuff, even something from the late 18, early 1900s, it takes several years for that, the stuff to build up on it. So you don't just clean it all off overnight and expect it to be perfect. It takes time to get rid of the biological matter that builds up on these stones over time. Like, it's not a quick fix, really. In most cases, it's a slower process. And that's okay. Sometimes it's okay to slow down. I just think we live in a world of wanting like that instant gratification. And this is one of those processes that's not going to be instant gratification. It's going to be a timely thing. But when it's done and it's done right, then these stones will last another century or so, hopefully, for, the next couple of generations to enjoy and visit.
Yeah, and it's like a difference between, like, I say this as a complete snob. Like, I will never pretend I'm not a giant Bostonian snob. I am. I say this in, like, do you want to be Instagram famous, or do you want to have your name in historical societies when people do research on the burying ground and go, oh my goodness, like, what kind of famous do you need to be? Like, what are you,
oh my gosh, I love that.
You know, and I struggle with that too. There's like a feedback loop you get where you're like, I didn't get so many interactions this week. Am I like, is it me? Is there something wrong with me? Is it because I didn't do this or I did that? Or like, I have a few sped up videos. And what's so funny about them is if you look at them, you will see the neurotic amount of text that I put on them that is like, this took me 4 hours to clean. And it's just the front. And you got to have her, like, the amount of text that I put on my reels, because I'm so afraid that people are going to think I'm speed cleaning, is ridiculous. Like, it's unattractive to the common person. Like, it's just not, it's not bringing in views.
But for the people that are taking the time to watch it, those are the people that want to learn how to do it correctly, or at least appreciate somebody who's doing it correctly if they're not going to do it themselves. And I know for a long time, when I really started wanting to do more preservation on my own, I was intimidated at first to really start touching the stones, because I didn't want to just start doing something to a stone and then mess it up. And even as I started to learn more of the techniques, I was still like, do I really want to touch this stone, or do we just leave it and let it be? Because I don't want to be the one that's responsible for the damage to it, or like, if it's starting to really fall over, or it's not connected on a base properly anymore. Like, there's a lot of those little things to consider that I kind of get a little worried about. So I've done some, but I'm still a little hesitant with certain things, because I just don't want to do more damage than there's already been done to a stone.
Yeah, I don't
You're
want to be
likely not going to do damage if you're doing it properly, right? So
yes,
that's the
true.
beauty. So I'm beholden to the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Historic Preservation. And as such, part of those standards is to fully document my work.
Right.
So I have, a lot of people are doing this without taking before and after photos, or even documenting the carvers or writing on the script. Like, there's a lot of people just going rogue out there. And one of the beauties of documenting your work and taking before and after photos, like the one behind you, is that I can see that I didn't cause that scratch. I can see like
True.
nothing that looks damaged on that stone was not already there. Like, I don't see any damage, but you know what I mean? Oftentimes I'm like, did I do that? And then I look back at the before, I'm like, no, I didn't do that. It was like that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the pros of always documenting your work, is after a while, you're like, there, Rachel, you are not running around scraping up things. Like, you're actually doing a great job, and that was already damaged, but you can't trust your memory to tell you that. So when you start cleaning specifically, because that's usually what people start with, is cleaning and simple resets. Most people are paranoid in that way. And then as you sort of build up your confidence, you know what it is and what is not fragile anymore. And if something does get damaged while you're working on it, more often than not, it's because it was holding on by a thread already. Like, so there are times when you're working on a stone where you really need to ask yourself this question: is it improved? Did I improve its condition or not? Because you're going to be dealing sometimes with gravestones that are in 12 different pieces. Those pieces have been in different conditions. Some were under the ground, some were over the ground. They're sugaring, which means they're eroding in a way that makes it look like sugar. You touch it and they want to like come apart. And so at the end of the day, you're using all the great methods that you can use, but you do have to ask yourself this overall question of, am I doing more good than harm? Because occasionally you're going to move a slate stone that was holding on by a thread, and it is going to delaminate in your hand because it was going to do that. But as long as you know how to treat that damage, you're still leaving it in a better condition than when you found it. But there are some stones that we work on that are just in very, very bad condition. They are, if we don't do something, they are lost, they're gone, So doing something is better than just allowing the mowers to continue to run over them. So you do get over that paranoia eventually. I mean, I think the paranoia that still strikes me occasionally is, with climate change, we have a lot more storms than we used to have. And these are outside objects. These aren't museum objects that are under glass. And you can't control the wind. You can't control tree limbs falling. Believe it or not, you can't even control squirrels and owls from perching and jumping up on your gravestone over and over and over again. Like I said, you can't control visitors. You can't control all of these variables. And sometimes you repair a stone and it falls over because something hopped on it or something blew it apart or whatever. And you have to go back and repair it in a stronger, sturdier way. So it's, the more you do this stuff, the more you realize that you sometimes have to make difficult decisions for the longevity of the stone. You want to aim for things that are reversible. You want to not do harm. But with some of these stones, some of the things you're going to do are not going to be reversible. And but that, in those cases, that means they were a goner if we didn't do something, so.
Well, and at least by doing something, you're documenting it again, because like you said, you take the before and after pictures and everything. So there's documentation now of the stone, the condition of the stone when you started it. And even if it should fall apart because it was at that point, you've documented that all the way through. And now we have a record of that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So
and now we found all the pieces that maybe weren't there. The idea of conservation is to conserve it in a way that it is, it stays, in good enough condition until the next group of conservators, when their new materials and their new methods can come around and do a better job. It's like I look at repairs from the past, the metal strapping, the bolts going through stones, the big heaps of cement, and I look at them and I go, that's all they had. They didn't know what else to do. And it's too bad that the things that they had available to them were actually pretty destructive.
Right.
But it is all they knew to do. Like, otherwise, what were they going to do? Just leave them on the ground? They just didn't know.
Right.
Yeah. We have one that dates to like 1870, and it's a large one, but it's held up by straps, or I'm sorry, the metal
Pins.
pins, and it's cemented, and it's a jigsaw puzzle. And
Yeah.
everybody comments about how ugly it is. And I said, well, if it wasn't like this, those pieces, it would be gone.
Yeah, we wouldn't even have the stone.
Yeah, it wouldn't even be there anymore. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, there is specific training that goes in to learning how to do this properly. So where did you get your training from? What training classes did you take?
So I'll give you an example. Josh is down in Brooklyn right now taking some training on a specialty mortar. He actually just sent me a picture from Jean-Michel Basquiat's grave, which I sent him and I was like, you gotta leave a paintbrush. He's my favorite painter. So we take a lot of these like classes that are by the inventors of the products.
Okay.
We also did a lot of classes with people who had been in the field for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of workshops, a lot of traveling to learn. And, we would pick up, I already had a background in object conservation
Right.
from working in museums. So I understood microclimates and I understood what moisture does to things. And so I kind of already had the benefit of a free education from historic New England and like
Yay!
all this stuff. So, I don't think that there's one background that's correct to come from this. Like, I happen to have a background in geology is what I went to school for, which of course helps.
Yeah.
But I think all of this can be learned in an apprenticeship sort of way. I'm not a big fan of going into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt for a career that you're not going to make that back from,
Yeah.
I think it's okay to be poor and be to get the right training. I did join the Association for Gravestone Studies early on and, read Lynette Strangstad's book, which I really loved. And just from there, I just hired conservators to come onto my sites that I was working on and, teach us what we needed to learn. And I devour scientific literature, endlessly, trying to find the best way to do this as some sort of, have we made some progress in this material or that material? So, it can be
because there's so many conservators back there on the East Coast that are very educated in stone conservation. Unfortunately, in Colorado, they're few and very far between.
Yeah, we actually just recently had somebody actually reach out to us from Kansas looking for somebody to help them in Kansas. And I was like, I don't know anybody in Kansas that does it. I gave them some resources that I had that are nearby, but I was like, unfortunately, there's not a lot of people that are, like you said, there's a lot of people that do museum studies and they do conservation of objects that are going to be stored in museums or other locations. But this outdoor work with the cemeteries, especially, there's not as many people doing that in particular. And I feel like it's a little unfortunate that that's not hasn't become part of like the museum studies courses for people who are majoring in that. Like, I feel like that's something that could be added at some point because I think, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just more conscious of it because I'm involved with cemeteries, but I feel like there's more and more people becoming aware of the importance of preserving cemeteries, especially our older ones. But like you said, there's not like a whole bunch of, you had to kind of go find your conservators and invite them to you. And then you had to go find the classes because of the products that you were choosing to use. And, there's not like one, and I think that's what's hard for people who haven't done it before. There's not one location that you can go to and find all this information out because it's sporadic and it's spaced out in different places. And you have to spend time, and in your case, several years, like learning who the people are, where to get the stuff, where to take these courses, do some traveling. Like it's not just all in one location to learn how to do this particular type of work.
It can be if you spend enough money to bring people
Well,
to your location.
like you said, if you want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're not going to get your return on.
Yeah, you're definitely not doing it for the money.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the funny thing is there really aren't a lot of conservators in our area. And, you know, I look at all these like Facebook and Instagram pages and the ones that are more for entertainment. And I think, oh, you know, I was one of the first people to have an Instagram or Facebook page to educate people. And that's because I knew that wide swaths of the country didn't have access to information.
Yes.
And where are they going to get that information if someone like me isn't like, this is called delaminating, this is called this, and this is how it's treated. And, you know, it gave people, and I have an open door policy. You can just like, let me know you're coming and you can just message me. And, you know, I've never, if somebody is out in, say, Kansas, and they have the heart and the passion to repair a cemetery, I would never say to them, you need to go get educated. I would say to them, would you like to video call me? And I will walk you through how to do this repair and where to get the material, because I know that these people want to repair cemeteries. They don't have those resources. And I'm absolutely not in it I mean, I'm in it for money in the sense that I don't have a definite job.
Well, you are now.
Exactly. And if you had a job, you wouldn't be able to do, another job. You wouldn't be able to do what you're doing now. And it's not like people are banging down the door to get in there. And it's not like you're having to fight these people off to preserve the headstones. That's
right. My 2005 Ford Focus doesn't put gas in itself. Like I need a job.
You're like, unfortunately, I won't be the next Jeff Bezos doing this, but
I know. Didn't marry rich. I just took a lot of weird turns. That I would never discourage somebody from doing this work,
right.
Even if if they didn't get that education. I just wish there were more people out there offering skills, because you can actually learn a lot on a video call. Like it's not like it all has to be in person. And people were very generous to me when I was learning. Like I have people that I learned from that, you know, I feel like I harass. I feel like whenever I have a question, I'm like, let's call Tamara. Like, So there have been people who are generous with me. So I try to be generous with other people.
Well, I think that's perfect. So that those people who want to learn, like you said, the people who really want to learn so they can preserve what's in their area, wherever they live, can have people with knowledge and skills to teach them and pass it on so that it gets done correctly or as close to correctly. Like you said, for right now, things are always changing because we're always learning about different methods, different ways, and how to improve things. And I think there's a lot of people that are out there trying to work on that too, where, there's all these companies that make these products that say, okay, what else can we do that makes it better? That we know is, whatever it is. So I think that's fabulous that you have made yourself available for that you're not shutting yourself down to the idea of if somebody approaches you and says, hey, can I get help doing this? What do I do? Because it's like I said, initially I was intimidated. I'm way less intimidated than I used to be. But in the beginning, before I had done any preservation type stuff, I was like, this is a little scary to just start working on headstones.
Yeah.
It's still scary,
and there were like sorry, Diane, what was that?
I was gonna say I've been doing it for a while, and I only do right now, but you have sort of encouraged me to be a little bit braver in that I only gonna do what I know that's an easy fix or something that I know I'm not gonna mess up. But like you said, though, who knows what's gonna come down the pike maybe 10 years from now that will be even better. But if we don't do something now, the rest of it's all going to be gone. So it's going to be, won't be there. And that sort of helps with the fear of I'm gonna mess it up. And then everybody's gonna know forever and ever and ever. I'll go down in the history books as the one who messed it up.
I mean, you're going to. You know what I mean? Like, just like I judged people's repairs who failed in the past, there are going to be people who judge my repairs in the future. But I hope there are enough articles and whatnot out there about me where people can read up and go, oh, she actually had a heart of gold. She wasn't like going out there using these outdated techniques, outdated,
Right.
in 2050.
You know better than to use concrete now. We know to use the materials closest to the stone as possible, or stone materials.
What the problem is none of these materials were really developed for gravestones. And
right.
So, because that's not where the money is. A lot of the mortars we use are really for structural buildings, for, stay away from things that create microclimates like pins. If you do use epoxy, use it in dots so water can move out of the stone and around it. Don't smear it on so it's creating a microclimate and eroding around the epoxy. Half of conservation is just allowing water to come and go. That's it. If you feel like you put on a raincoat and the water is, not permeable.
Right.
It's the same thing on a gravestone. If you're adding materials that water can't move around, it's not going to come out of the stone. It's going to cause erosion. So when you have those pins and you have those straps, you usually find erosion around them because that water didn't move away. But that's not to say that the materials that we have are perfect or that they were developed for gravestones. They weren't. D2 was not invented for gravestones. They later figured out that it's great for it does the job, but these mortars were not invented for gravestones.
Right, that's true.
And so we're taking things that are meant for other, historic preservation projects like old houses and, other masonry projects, and we are applying them to this kind of, gravestones that may not even be the same material as what the material was invented for. So people are just kind of doing their best with what they have. We have more than we had 50 years ago, for sure, but it's not perfect, you know?
And like you said, it's constantly changing and somebody's constantly saying, oh, wait, this might actually be a better technique than what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And you just have to experiment. And a little bit is experimentation, right? Like somebody comes up with the idea of using a particular material because they think, oh, this might actually be more effective than what we were using before. But you have to experiment with it and you have to actually try it to see if it's going to work. And then if it doesn't, and we've had the conversation about D2 before, where right now that's it's considered one of the best practices for using for cleaning purposes. But who knows, in 30 years, somebody may find something that works better and that might be even safer than what D2 has been deemed to do. So
sure. And other countries have started going back on using these quaternary ammonium cleaners. We use them a lot in the US because they're so much better than the alternative, right? They're better than whatever the pink foamy stuff is, and they're better than they're certainly better than bleach, right?
Please don't use bleach.
Well, bleach, the problem with bleach is it's a sodium. So what's happening is you're putting bleach on the stone and it's creating salt crystals and breaking the stone apart eventually. So one of the things that I keep an eye on, because it's something that I need to worry about in New England, where maybe places with newer stones don't need to worry about, are consolidants. So we have a lot of marble and limestone that are sugaring. We kind of talked about that. The silica content over time gets leached out of the stone. It starts looking like sugar when you touch it or look at it. And what you have to do is reintroduce the minerals back into the stone to re-harden the stone. It's not reversible. After, with a certain amount of time, the water will do the same thing. It'll wipe out the consolidant. But there's a lot of debate with these stones that are sugaring so badly. What consolidant is the best consolidant to use? Do you want to use a consolidant which has what you call an impregnator, which gets into the stone and sort of binds around the individual, grains and sort of repels water? Do you want that water repelling stuff? Or, have you guys ever heard of water glass? Some people use water glass to preserve eggs. It's silica, basically. And so there are people out there who just use water glass, but that has its own problems where it only permeates the top layer. And so just like with sandstone, the water can still get deep in and
behind
if you don't put enough on. But, so there's no perfect consolidant, but there are a lot of things being developed right now for consolidation. There are just different formulas, and I watch them very closely because I'm ready to change my formula as soon as something better is found, but I have to use something because the gravestones that we consolidate are ones that aren't going to make it for a few more years, So you got to kind of, keep an eye out when you even feel like your own techniques are lacking. Are there other things that are coming up that you should, be ready to switch to at any moment? Like, don't get stuck in your ways. Don't be like, this is the consolidant I use. I've used it forever because
and it's the only one and there's nothing better. And yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm always wanting the best thing for what I do, but I'm not a chemist. So I can't,
Right. You're not the one experimenting with the different types of things. So when you first began, of course, you had to go learn all of this stuff because you didn't know it yet. So you were just starting out. So for somebody who might just be starting out in preservation, who's wanting to get interested, or that person who discovered the cemetery that nobody's cared for half a century, what would your suggestions be to them to get started, for things that they should do to get started if they're looking to start doing this?
Yeah, I always think that people should just start with stone cleaning and simple resets, with the caveat that I think sometimes people clean stones that don't need to be cleaned. Unless the lichen or overgrowth is actually damaging the stone. And even then, it's like you might not be trained enough to do the follow-up conservation on a stone that's being damaged. Maybe there are things you need to stay away from anyway. But unless the lichen is obscuring the name, the inscription, I don't touch them. I handle the ones that are being damaged by the lichen very, very gently to remove it and then do follow-up conservation on the underlying problem.
Right.
And I would say, for people starting out, you don't need to clean every stone. It's okay for your graveyard to look old a little bit, like it's okay. Like
there's dirt there, people. It's for real.
Yeah, dirt's not hurting. If you go to one of my projects and you see a lot of white gleaming stones, it's because they were completely either covered with lichen or I had to clean them to repair them because they were broken.
Mm-hmm.
But we leave a lot of stuff just as it is. And you only need to reset a gravestone if it's leaning more than 15 degrees. You don't need to reset a gravestone if it's tilting, because that's not harming it. Like, it has to be leaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to reset a gravestone in equal parts of the soil that you took from the ground, sand, and somewhere around 3/4 inch rounded pea stone, and tamp it in. Because if you don't add that sand and pea stone, it's just going to become mud and it's just going to go back to
leaning over again.
Lean pretty quickly. So, but it's not rocket science. You just need to take the time and make the investment in the sand and the pea stone.
Yeah.
That's what we did this summer. We spent every Monday evening at two of our cemeteries, and yeah, it's amazing how quickly that sand and pea gravel gets used, because it does. And that's exactly what we did, because it doesn't make a cement, but, and I don't want to use that as an analogy, but it does form up without having to, make a quote base or, for it to sit in. And we
Gives you a
have,
firm foundation.
thank you, Jen, a firm foundation. And we are blessed with rock hard clay in one of our cemeteries. So it's like,
Where are you guys?
in Colorado, but
Oh,
there's two different parts of town that the cemeteries in two different parts, and one is like rock hard, oh my God, clay, and the other one is so very nice and soft. But
yeah.
and everything sinks where,
Where there are like a lot of pine trees.
Yep.
Yeah, that's usually where the sun. Yeah, it like makes everything fluffy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a cemetery up in Leadville, and there's a whole section because it's pine trees, but you can see the ground does this, and you can see where the graves kind of sunk in, and then the rest,
Yeah.
and it's all under the trees. And so as you're
Yeah.
walking along, you just see these like waves, but that's just the way the ground has settled over the years. But that's
Yeah,
that's,
I mean our driveway looks like a sand and gravel lot happening. We just have a big truck from the local sand and gravel company just dump like a yard of stuff every couple weeks. We put it in buckets and we put it in a truck, and we go through a lot of it too. And,
Oh, I mean,
yeah.
did they just do that, or do you have to pay for that sand and gravel? Are they like,
No, we pay for it.
okay, it's like, dang,
Yeah.
need to go find some sand and gravel. Somebody would dump it in my backyard.
Yeah, it's cheaper to have it dumped in your backyard than buy bags of it. It's the difference between like $40 and like $100 and something dollars. It's
for our listeners who just heard that silence for a moment. That was Dianne's wheels in her head turning when she's like, "Oh wait, maybe this is how we need to go about doing this here."
yeah.
I have
Go and buy bags of sand and pea stone. You have it dumped somewhere, even if it's somewhere in the graveyard, and put it in buckets.
Oh no, because we went many, 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 many times to Home Depot. Another lady and I, Judy and I, throwing bags of
Like in the bags.
gravel. Yeah, and it's like,
but yeah, that's probably a better way to do it, especially if we're going to do a lot of areas. But since you have whole cemeteries that you end up working in, so
yeah,
I'm sure there's moments where you probably have whole sections that have to be reset just because the ground is settled differently. Or this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation with Rachel Meyer. In fact, we were having so much fun when we were recording with her that it was an extended conversation. So we decided to make 2 episodes out of our recording session with her. So this is part 1. So make sure you tune back in next Thursday for part 2 as we continue our discussion on preservation in cemeteries with Rachel Meyer of Epoch Preservation. See you then.
So we thank you for taking the time to join us for this ordinary, extraordinary story. To learn more about the story we shared, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find the resources we used to research this episode. And if you are watching us on YouTube, make sure to click the like button, the like thumbs up, and to subscribe and leave us a comment, because this all helps move us up in the YouTube algorithm. And also, if you care to donate or buy us a copy, we have a link on our YouTube description, or if you visit our website, the little coffee cup is located at the bottom left-hand corner.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X, formerly Twitter, at OrdExtraSim. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
Until we meet again.
And just again, thank you, Shelby, for joining us.
Mhm.
For those of us, or for those viewers who are watching us on YouTube, like Dianne and I are smiling ear to ear because we enjoyed this discussion with Shelby so much and learning so much about Louise Hill.
Mhm.
And I love that she was willing to come on and expand on what we had shared in our previous episode. But we get so much more of the woman that Louise really was. And
Yeah.
that is the point of telling these stories, is learning who these people really were and remembering that they really were people. And so thank you, Shelby, for sharing with us. Don't forget to visit us on social media. And if you're interested and you go to our show notes on the website, there are links to Shelby's book, all about Louise, the Queen of Denver, as well as a link to her website. So if you want to know more information from her, you can definitely contact her through her website. And we have all of that in our show notes. And don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and so much more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at Ord Extra Sim. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and histories to discover us and so many of the ordinary, extraordinary stories.
Until we meet again.